The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla made her way through the ornate corridors. Her silk dress rustled softly against the marble floors, and her pearl necklace caught the light streaming through the tall windows. Today was supposed to be a routine day, but something felt different in the air. The palace staff moved about their duties with practiced precision, bowing slightly as the Queen passed. Footmen in their crisp uniforms stood at attention, while maids hurried along with fresh linens and polished silver. The familiar sounds of palace life echoed through the halls. The soft click of heels whispered conversations, and the distant chiming of grandfather clocks. Queen Camilla paused near the main entrance, checking her appearance in an antique mirror. She had an important meeting with foreign dignitaries in an hour, and everything needed to be perfect. The weight of her royal duties pressed upon her shoulders, as it had every day since she became queen. The public scrutiny, the endless protocols, the careful balance of tradition and modernization, it all demanded her constant attention. As she adjusted her brooch, a young guard named Thomas approached the entrance doors. He was new to the palace security team, having joined just 3 months ago. His uniform was immaculate, his posture straight, and his dedication to duty was evident in every step. Thomas took his responsibilities seriously, perhaps too seriously for someone still learning the intricate customs of royal service. The Queen noticed his approach but continued with her preparations. She had grown accustomed to the constant presence of security personnel, understanding their vital role in protecting the royal family. However, she also expected them to maintain proper protocol and show appropriate respect for royal customs and personal space. Thomas positioned himself near the entrance, scanning the area with careful attention. His training had emphasized vigilance above all else, and he was determined to prove himself worthy of his position. The young guard was unaware that his next actions would create a situation that would ripple through the palace and beyond. Queen Camilla moved toward the entrance hall, her mind focused on the upcoming diplomatic meeting. She carried herself with the grace and dignity expected of her position, each movement calculated and purposeful. The morning light illuminated her face, showing both the strength she had developed over years of public service and the subtle signs of the pressures that came with her role. The atmosphere in the palace was calm, almost serene. Staff members went about their tasks efficiently, maintaining the seamless operation that kept royal life running smoothly. Guards at various posts remained alert but relaxed, comfortable in their familiar environment. None of them could have predicted what was about to unfold. As Queen Camilla approached the main entrance area, she noticed Thomas standing rigidly at his post. His intense focus on his duties was admirable, but something about his demeanor seemed overly tense. The Queen had learned to read people quickly during her years in royal service, and she sensed that this young guard was perhaps trying too hard to impress his superiors. The morning routine continued around them as palace life flowed in its established patterns. Servants carried trays of fine china, ministers arrived for scheduled appointments, and the gentle hum of activity filled the air. It was within this backdrop of normalcy that an extraordinary incident was about to occur. Thomas maintained his position, his eyes constantly moving as he surveyed the area. His commitment to security was unwavering, but his understanding of royal protocol was still developing. The combination of dedication and inexperience would soon create a perfect storm of misunderstanding. Queen Camilla continued her approach, expecting the usual respectful acknowledgement from the guard. She had no reason to anticipate any deviation from the standard procedures that governed interactions between royalty and palace staff. The morning was proceeding exactly as thousands of others had before, until it suddenly wasn't. The stage was set for an incident that would test the boundaries of protocol, respect, and authority within the walls of one of the world's most famous palaces. What happened next would surprise everyone present and create ripples that would extend far beyond that single moment in time. Thomas stepped forward as Queen Camilla approached, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio. In his eagerness to demonstrate his vigilance, he had misread the situation entirely. The Queen's purposeful stride toward the entrance triggered his overzealous security instincts, and he made a decision that would prove catastrophic. "Your Majesty, please step back," Thomas announced firmly, positioning himself directly in the Queen's path. His voice carried an authority that was completely inappropriate for addressing royalty. The young guard had confused his role as protector with that of controller, failing to recognize that the queen had every right to move freely within her own palace. Queen Camilla stopped abruptly, her eyes widening in disbelief. Never in her years of royal service had a guard spoken to her with such presumption. The corridor fell silent as nearby staff members froze in their tasks, sensing the tension that suddenly filled the air. Even the soft sounds of palace life seemed to pause in anticipation of what would happen next. "I beg your pardon?" the queen replied, her voice carrying the icy tone she reserved for the most serious breaches of protocol. Her years of dealing with difficult situations had taught her to maintain composure, but her patience was being tested in ways she had never experienced before. Thomas, completely oblivious to the severity of his error, continued his misguided attempt at security enforcement. "Ma'am, I need you to remain in the designated area until clearance is confirmed," he stated, his training manual language sounding absurd when directed at the sovereign of the realm. The queen's face flushed with a mixture of anger and incredulity. She had endured years of criticism, public scrutiny, and personal attacks with dignity and grace. She had navigated complex political situations, family dramas, and media storms, but being ordered about by a guard in her own home crossed a line that she would not tolerate. "Young man, do you have any idea who you are speaking to?" Queen Camilla asked, her voice low and dangerous. The nearby staff members began to inch closer, sensing that intervention might be necessary. Palace protocols had procedures for almost every conceivable situation, but none covered a guard attempting to restrict the queen's movements within her own residence. Thomas, still failing to grasp the magnitude of his mistake, doubled down on his position. "I understand your frustration, ma'am, but security procedures must be followed by everyone," he replied with the confidence of someone completely unaware of his impending doom. The queen's restraint finally snapped. Years of suppressed frustration, countless moments of biting her tongue in public, and the sheer audacity of being treated like a common visitor in her own palace combined into a perfect storm of royal fury. Without warning, her hand flew through the air and connected sharply with Thomas's cheek. The sound of the slap echoed through the marble corridors like a gunshot. Time seemed to freeze as everyone present processed what had just occurred. Thomas staggered backward, his hand flying to his reddened cheek, his eyes wide with shock and dawning realization of his tremendous error. Palace staff members stood motionless, their faces reflecting a mixture of horror, fascination, and barely concealed satisfaction at seeing the presumptuous guard receive his comeuppance. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the queen's labored breathing as she struggled to regain her composure. "How dare you?" Queen Camilla hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you presume to order me about in my own home?" Her chest rose and fell rapidly as years of pent-up frustration found their release in this single moment of uncontrolled emotion. Thomas finally understood the full scope of his mistake. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and he immediately dropped to one knee, his face pale with terror and embarrassment. "Your Majesty, I had no idea. I thought," he stammered, his words tumbling over each other in his desperation to apologize. The queen stood over the kneeling guard, her fury still burning bright. The careful composure she maintained in public had completely evaporated, revealing the passionate woman beneath the royal facade. Her hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline of the moment coursed through her veins. Around them, the palace continued to hold its collective breath, waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would resolve itself. The aftermath of the slap created a surreal atmosphere in the palace corridor. Thomas remained on one knee, his face burning with shame and the sting of the queen's hand. His career flashed before his eyes as he realized that his overzealous attempt at security had just ended in disaster. The other staff members remained frozen, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness this historic breach of royal protocol. Queen Camilla stood breathing heavily, her hand still tingling from the impact. The satisfaction of finally releasing her pent-up frustration was immediately followed by a wave of regret. She had always prided herself on maintaining dignity under pressure, and this public display of anger was completely unlike her usual composed demeanor. "Get up," she commanded Thomas, her voice now cold and controlled. The guard slowly rose to his feet, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. Red finger marks were clearly visible across his left cheek, a permanent reminder of this moment that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Lady Margaret, the Queen's long-serving lady-in-waiting, appeared at her side as if summoned by some invisible signal. Her face was carefully neutral, but her eyes betrayed her concern for both the immediate situation and its potential consequences. She had served the royal family for over 20 years and had never witnessed anything quite like this. "Your Majesty," Lady Margaret whispered softly, "perhaps we should move to a more private area." Her suggestion was both practical and urgent, as other staff members were beginning to gather at a respectful distance, drawn by the commotion and whispered rumors spreading through the palace. The Queen nodded curtly, her royal training reasserting itself, as she began to calculate the damage control that would be necessary. She straightened her shoulders and smoothed her dress, attempting to restore some semblance of her usual dignity. The transformation was remarkable as she shifted back into her public persona, though the fire in her eyes remained. Thomas stood awkwardly, uncertain whether he should speak, apologize further, or simply wait for judgment to be passed upon him. His fellow guards watched from their posts with a mixture of sympathy and relief that they had not been the ones to make such a catastrophic error. The young man's future with the palace security team seemed very much in doubt. "Thomas Sullivan," the Queen said, having somehow learned his full name in the space of minutes. "You will report to the head of security immediately. You will then be escorted from the premises pending a full investigation into this incident." Her words were measured and official, but the underlying anger was unmistakable. "Yes, Your Majesty," Thomas replied in barely a whisper, his voice cracking with emotion. He had joined the palace guard with dreams of serving the crown with honor and distinction. Instead, he had managed to assault the Queen Consort through his own ignorance and presumption. As word of the incident began to spread through the palace's informal communication network, senior staff members started to converge on the scene. The head of security, Major Harrison, arrived first, his face grim as he quickly assessed the situation. Behind him came various household officials, each understanding that they were witnessing a moment that would require careful management. The Queen's private secretary, Sir Edmund Walsh, approached with the urgent, measured steps of someone accustomed to handling crises. His mind was already working through the implications of the incident, considering how to minimize any potential damage to the royal reputation, while ensuring appropriate consequences for the guard's behavior. "Your Majesty," Sir Edmund said with a respectful bow, "shall I have the incident logged through the appropriate channels?" His question was diplomatic, but everyone present understood its significance. An official report would make the incident part of the permanent record, with all the scrutiny and potential embarrassment that might entail. Queen Camilla considered her options carefully. Her initial impulse was to demand full accountability and consequences, but she also recognized that overreacting might draw unwanted attention to her own loss of composure. The balance between justice and discretion required delicate navigation. "The incident will be handled internally," she decided, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Thomas will face appropriate disciplinary action, and there will be a comprehensive review of security training protocols to ensure this never happens again." The assembled staff nodded their understanding, each mentally noting their role in maintaining the confidentiality of what they had witnessed. Palace discretion was a skill honed over centuries of practice, and this situation would test those abilities once again. Meanwhile, in the king's private study 3 floors above, King Charles was completely unaware of the drama unfolding in the corridor below. He sat at his antique mahogany desk, carefully reviewing correspondence from the Prime Minister about upcoming state visits. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, creating patterns on the Persian carpet that had graced the room for over 50 years. The king had always been an early riser, preferring to handle his most important business in the quiet hours before the palace fully awakened. His schedule was meticulously planned, with each appointment and engagement carefully coordinated by his private staff. This morning was no different as he methodically worked through briefing papers and official documents. A soft knock at the door interrupted his concentration. "Enter," he called without looking up from his papers, expecting his valet with the morning tea or perhaps his private secretary with urgent updates. Instead, he heard the hurried footsteps of someone moving with unusual urgency across the thick carpet. "Your Majesty." came the breathless voice of James, one of the junior household staff members who had witnessed the corridor incident. The young man's face was flushed with exertion from his rapid climb up 3 flights of stairs, and his usually impeccable composure was notably shaken. King Charles finally looked up, immediately noticing the staff member's agitated state. In his decades of royal experience, he had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when something significant had occurred. James's demeanor suggested this was not a routine matter requiring his attention. "What is it, James?" the king asked, setting down his fountain pen and giving the messenger his full attention. His voice carried the calm authority that had served him well through countless crises, both personal and professional, throughout his long preparation for the throne. "Sir, there has been an incident involving Her Majesty downstairs," James began, his words tumbling out in his nervousness. That is to say, there was a confrontation with one of the security guards and—" He paused, struggling to find the appropriate words to describe what he had witnessed. The king's expression immediately shifted from mild curiosity to sharp concern. Any incident involving Camilla automatically became his highest priority, both as her husband and as the sovereign responsible for the dignity of the crown. He rose from his chair, his papers forgotten as he focused entirely on understanding the situation. "Tell me exactly what happened," King Charles commanded, his voice taking on the edge of authority that emerged only in serious situations. He moved around the desk to face James directly, reading the young man's body language for additional clues about the severity of the incident. James took a deep breath and recounted the events as clearly as he could manage. He described Thomas's inappropriate commands to the Queen, her mounting anger, and the shocking moment when her hand connected with the guard's face. As he spoke, the king's expression grew increasingly grim, his jaw tightening with each detail. "Where is the Queen now?" the king asked when James finished his account. His mind was already racing through the implications of what he had heard, considering both the immediate need to support his wife and the longer-term consequences for palace security and public relations. "She is in the blue drawing room with Lady Margaret and Sir Edmund." "Your Majesty," James replied, "the situation has been contained, and the guard has been removed from duty pending investigation." The king nodded approvingly at the swift action taken by the senior staff, but his primary concern remained his wife's well-being. He understood better than most the constant pressures she faced and the careful self-control required to maintain royal dignity in all circumstances. If Camilla had been pushed to the point of physical action, the provocation must have been severe indeed. Has word of this incident spread beyond the immediate witnesses? The king inquired, already anticipating the potential media nightmare that could ensue if the story became public. His years of experience with press scrutiny had taught him to think several steps ahead in managing any crisis. "No, sir," James assured him. "Sir Edmund has spoken with everyone present about the need for discretion, and Major Harrison has secured the area. The incident is being treated as a confidential security matter." King Charles felt a measure of relief at this news, knowing that containing the story would be crucial to protecting both Camilla's reputation and the dignity of the monarchy. However, he also recognized that his immediate priority was supporting his wife through what must have been a deeply upsetting experience. "Thank you, James," the king said, dismissing the messenger with a nod. "Please inform Sir Edmund that I will be down shortly to assess the situation personally." As the staff member bowed and departed, the king moved toward his private elevator, his mind focused entirely on reaching Camilla and ensuring her well-being. The short elevator ride gave him a moment to consider his approach to the situation, balancing his roles as husband, king, and guardian of the institution they both served. The elevator descended smoothly, but King Charles felt his anxiety rising with each passing second. In their years together, he had seen Camilla handle countless difficult situations with grace and patience that often exceeded his own. For her to have reached the breaking point suggested that the guard's behavior had been truly inexcusable. As the elevator doors opened, the king was immediately struck by the unusual tension in the normally serene palace atmosphere. Staff members moved with careful, measured steps, their voices hushed in a way that indicated they were all acutely aware something significant had occurred. The very air seemed charged with the aftermath of the confrontation. Sir Edmund appeared at his side almost instantly, as if he had been waiting for the king's arrival. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of stress. His tie was slightly askew, and there were worry lines around his eyes that spoke to the seriousness of the situation he had been managing. "Your Majesty," Sir Edmund said with a respectful bow. "Her Majesty is in the blue drawing room. She has requested privacy to compose herself, but I believe she would welcome your presence." The careful, diplomatic language could not entirely mask the private secretary's concern for the Queen's emotional state. King Charles nodded and made his way quickly toward the blue drawing room, his footsteps echoing in the corridor where the incident had occurred just an hour earlier. The scene had been completely cleared, with no visible signs of the confrontation that had taken place. But the king could sense the lingering tension in the space. He paused briefly at the ornate doors of the blue drawing room, taking a moment to steel himself for whatever state he might find Camilla in. Throughout their relationship, he had learned that she was far stronger than many people realized. But he also knew that her composure came at a significant personal cost that she rarely allowed others to see. The king entered the room to find Camilla seated in her favorite armchair near the window, staring out at the palace gardens with an expression he recognized as her way of processing difficult emotions. Lady Margaret stood discreetly near the far wall, ready to assist if needed, but giving the Queen space to work through her feelings. "My dear," King Charles said softly, approaching Camilla with the gentle manner he used only in their most private moments. He could see the tension in her shoulders and the slight tremor in her hands that indicated she was still struggling with the aftermath of her loss of control. Camilla turned to him with eyes that reflected a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and relief at his presence. "Charles, I lost my temper completely," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "That young guard was so presumptuous, so utterly disrespectful, that I simply couldn't contain myself any longer." The king moved to the chair beside her, taking her hands in his and feeling the slight trembling that confirmed how deeply the incident had affected her. He could see the internal struggle she was experiencing between justification for her actions and regret for the public nature of her response. "Tell me what happened from your perspective," he said gently, understanding that she needed to process the incident verbally before they could move forward with any decisions about consequences or damage control. Camilla recounted the encounter with Thomas, her voice gaining strength as she described the guard's inappropriate commands and his complete failure to recognize her authority. As she spoke, the king could see her anger rekindling, but he also noticed how she began to second-guess her own reaction. "I know I shouldn't have struck him," she continued, looking down at her hands. "It was completely beneath the dignity of my position, and I'm ashamed that so many staff members witnessed my loss of control." But Charles, in that moment, I felt like every frustration, every slight, every moment of having to bite my tongue came rushing out at once. King Charles squeezed her hands reassuringly, understanding exactly the pressure she was describing. His own journey to the throne had been marked by similar moments of wanting to lash out at those who failed to show proper respect or understanding of royal protocol. "You are human, my dear," he said firmly, and while the response may not have been ideal, the provocation was entirely unacceptable. "No guard has the right to order you about in your own home, regardless of their interpretation of security procedures." Lady Margaret stepped forward discreetly, offering a cup of tea that Camilla accepted gratefully. The familiar ritual of afternoon tea seemed to help restore some normalcy to the situation, even as the implications of the morning's events continued to weigh on everyone present. "What happens now?" Camilla asked, looking between her husband and Lady Margaret. "I assume there will be consequences, both for the guard and potentially for me if this incident becomes public knowledge." The king considered his response carefully, knowing that his next words would set the tone for how they would handle this unprecedented situation together. King Charles stood up slowly, his decision crystallizing as he looked at his wife's troubled face. The weight of his crown had never felt heavier than in this moment, when he had to balance justice, mercy, and the protection of the institution he served. He moved to the window, gazing out at the same gardens that had witnessed centuries of royal dramas, each generation facing their own unique challenges. "The guard will face disciplinary action," the king announced firmly, turning back to face Camilla and Lady Margaret. His behavior was inexcusable, regardless of his inexperience or misguided interpretation of duty. No member of our security staff has the authority to restrict your movements or speak to you in such a manner. Camilla felt a wave of relief wash over her, knowing that Charles understood the severity of Thomas's breach of protocol. However, she also recognized that her own actions required acknowledgement and perhaps consequences as well. "And what of my response?" she asked quietly, meeting her husband's eyes directly. "I cannot pretend that striking him was appropriate, no matter how justified my anger may have been." The king returned to his seat beside her, taking her hands once again as he considered the complex balance they needed to strike. "Your reaction was human and understandable," he said carefully. "But you are right that it was not befitting your position. However, I believe the fault lies primarily with inadequate training and supervision of the security staff." Sir Edmund, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, cleared his throat respectfully. "Your Majesties, if I may suggest a course of action that addresses both aspects of this incident." When they nodded for him to continue, he stepped forward with the measured confidence of someone who had navigated many royal crises. "We could implement a comprehensive review of all security protocols and training procedures," Sir Edmund proposed. "This would serve both as a response to the guards' inappropriate behavior and as a proactive measure to prevent similar incidents in the future. The guard himself could be reassigned to duties that do not involve direct contact with the royal family, allowing him to continue his career while acknowledging the seriousness of his error." King Charles nodded approvingly at the suggestion, recognizing its wisdom in addressing the root cause of the problem, rather than simply punishing the symptoms. "And what of ensuring this incident remains private?" he asked, knowing that public knowledge of the confrontation could damage both Camilla's reputation and the dignity of the monarchy. "The staff members who witnessed the incident understand the importance of discretion," Sir Edmund assured them. "I have already spoken with each of them individually, and Major Harrison has conducted a security briefing, emphasizing confidentiality. Thomas himself is unlikely to speak of an incident that reflects so poorly on his own judgment." Lady Margaret stepped forward with a suggestion of her own. "Perhaps it would be beneficial for Her Majesty to personally oversee the new training protocols," she offered. "This would demonstrate leadership in addressing the problem, while also ensuring that all security personnel understand proper royal protocol." Camilla straightened in her chair, intrigued by this opportunity to turn a negative incident into positive change. "I like that approach," she said, her voice gaining strength. "It would allow me to ensure that future guards understand both their duties and their boundaries." Preventing similar misunderstandings, the king smiled, recognizing his wife's resilience and her ability to transform challenges into opportunities for improvement. "Then it is settled," he declared. "We will use this incident as a catalyst for positive change, rather than simply a crisis to be managed." Over the following days, the incident remained contained within the palace walls, exactly as the senior staff had promised. Thomas was quietly reassigned to perimeter duties, where his enthusiasm for security could be better channeled without risk of similar protocol breaches. His replacement received extensive training in royal etiquette alongside traditional security procedures. Queen Camilla threw herself into the training program review with characteristic determination, working closely with Major Harrison and other security officials to develop comprehensive protocols that balanced effective protection with appropriate respect for royal dignity. Her first-hand experience of the problems in the current system made her contributions invaluable. The new training program became a model for royal security services worldwide, with other monarchies requesting copies of the protocols that emerged from the palace review. What had begun as a moment of crisis was transformed into a lasting improvement in royal security practices. Months later, as Queen Camilla walked through the same corridor where the incident had occurred, she passed new guards who bowed respectfully and maintained appropriate distances while ensuring her safety. The memory of that difficult morning had faded into a valuable lesson learned, and the palace continued to function with renewed understanding of the delicate balance between security and respect. King Charles often reflected on how the incident had demonstrated both his wife's humanity and her strength, qualities that made her not just a better queen, but a better leader for having faced and overcome the challenge together.